Richard came up here and he had this meeting, and there were about 30 winemakers there, and he had this idea. And I said, hell, that makes a lot of sense. The result was just mind-blowing. I have a consulting firm, and I went to Della Toffola and I said, I really believe in this stuff. Let's run some trials. And I got a hold of 5 wineries on the East Coast, where I'm from. And then Rick and Lorenzo worked the team on the West Coast. So all together, we have about 10 wineries that did controlled trials on the machine. And that's what we're going to look at today. I'll give you 4 minutes to taste this first pair, which is the Todd Worker at Hawk Havens made these wines from his estate vineyard in Cape May, New Jersey. Here's the data on that first wine. Now, one thing I want to mention here is that their color measurements are for anthocyanins, whether or not they're visible. So young red wine, most of the monomeric anthocyanins are not in the visible form. So what you're looking at in these wines is something a little bit different than what's actually there. The actual molar concentration of anthocyanins, regardless of their form, is really important to structure. You can see treatment over the control, not a huge difference in the tannins. Let's just switch over to Todd. You can say a little bit about this wine, and then we'll throw it out for general discussion.
So I'm Todd Worker. I'm the owner and winemaker at Hawk Haven Vineyard in South Jersey, down by Cape May. Some of these wines that we're tasting here were from our 2020 vintage, which was a very challenging vintage for us. Very wet season, very uncharacteristically wet. So I think that kind of shows in the wines that you have here.
Well, we started off at Williamsburg Winery. So my first day, we were running at the recommended speed, which was 10 tons per hour through this machine, and working on whole berries. And we didn't get very much of an effect. I think now there were 3 things going against us. One was the high pectin that East Coast varieties have, and the second was the whole berry, and the third was that we were running too fast. By the time we got to Hawk Haven, we sort of suspected those things. However, I slowed the machine down, but not as much as I found I really needed to. Ultimately, we determined that about 3.5 tons per hour is what you need for whole berry, and for crushed fruit, about 6 tons.
I think one of the things that is it shows really well with this lot and the next lot is that there's a substantial difference in the color that comes through right away.
Yes, absolutely.
A lot more intensity and more of the purple hues and less of the orange hues.
Yeah, for sure. The treatment definitely has a much more vibrant color to it, and much more purple hue. So it's definitely a lot better looking wine.
And one thing I did find was ran some tri-stimulus color assays on them and found no statistical difference between control or treatment groups initially. Only found differences later after maturing, but fermentation kinetics seemed very similar.
Okay, let's move along. The Cabernet. Now, this was done 3 weeks later, so we had learned a lot. Slowed the machine down. Okay, so here's the chemistry. Once we kind of got it together to process this correctly, we got a huge increase in tannin and color. What really happened is we were really happy with what we were seeing, and so we ended up doing a bunch of other wines where there weren't any control. Altogether, there were actually 24 wines that were run. Only 9 of them had controls. Okay, let's do the next pair. So this will be the Long Island Cabernet Franc. Here's the numbers. A little bit of tannin enhancement, not much change in the color. I thought the principal difference was in texture. Well, the first thing I found is that and this is really common on DTMA wines, and it happens on micro-ox wines too, that as you're increasing the tannin, you're increasing the reductive strength, and the wines tend to be more closed. They aren't as aromatically expressive in their youth, and this is a good example. The other thing that I saw, Cabernet Franc always tends to be pretty grainy. I thought the control, one certainly couldn't call it thin, but it had less body and was more grainy.
I was a little surprised how different they were in the mouth, because visually they look really similar.
Yeah.
I thought it was interesting to compare this pair with the very first pair, which was visually looked very different, but I thought was a little bit of a letdown in the tasting, whereas this was just the opposite. You didn't expect much by looking at it visually, but better fruit expression, better deep red fruit expression, lower vegetal character, and I thought really a much better wine.
Maybe on the vegetal element that we were talking about, I think that they just express themselves in different ways. Like the control glass is more of the weedy dill type vegetal that I expect to see almost out of a red hybrid. And then the one that's treated is a lot more evolved. It's almost like the pine thing that you get off a black currant, maybe a little menthol, something like that. Where I feel like it folds in a lot more effectively and enhances the fruit rather than standing against it.
In all of the tastings that we did of regional character and quality for Appalachian America in hundreds of AVAs, Long Island Merlot was the most consistently high quality location variety combination that we ran into, and this wine's no exception.
Hey, Clark, can you tell what the tons per hour was on this?
About 8 on both of them. We had to slow the crusher down. I'm going to recommend to Russell, it's just a little bit more money, $2,000 more or something for twice the throughput. That's what I do at Williamsburg. I money and run it at.
Why do you think that we're seeing such a large difference in color in the first two samples than we're seeing in these two? Do you think it's the fruit, processing?
Well, first of all, Merlot colors up really fast. I'm going to show you a really interesting exception to that surprised the pants off of me later on in the tasting.
Do you think you could attribute some of the color aspect on our two wines to the fact that all of our controls were whole berry without any crushing whatsoever? Both whole berry because we didn't have the option to do anything other than that. And we did have our speed slowed down really well. So
I don't think there was any difference in the way we processed.
I think on this wine, it holds as for the Cab Franc. One of the main things I noticed is that the treatment is much more reductive.
Yeah.
And less expressive aromatically. But I find there's more potential fruit expression by mouth there. So it seems richer and fruitier by mouth, which you're not initially able to apprehend by the nose because the nose is a little reduced and closed.
Yeah, it's the same story as the previous wine. I see less veg, but also less overall aromatic expression by nose, but the retronasal is higher. Although Merlot does not tend to be grainy, where I found more body and a rounder tannin structure and more persistence.
I have just an open comment. Like, has anybody else? Are they perceiving that the DTMA treatment? We seem to get a perception that the wines have been aged longer, which is an interesting result. I don't know if anybody else is experiencing that or not, but
well,
we have a couple of these. It just appeared that they had a longer age, which is kind of nice.
In the case of this one, by color, I got a brown edge on the treatment and a purple edge on the control. So I would have said just the opposite. But if what you're referring to is the smoothing of that graininess, there's no question about it. I mean, the wines to me are much more refined, and maybe that signals age to you. But I think it happens right away.
Matthew, when you say they're aged, are they seem say a little bit more about what you mean specifically.
Okay, like, yeah, the Stacy points is elegant as opposed to younger. Just the perception that they've had that they've been aged longer, which has an interesting connotation if you're looking about getting wines out to market sooner based on economics. Just like, hey, we got to get it out there. It's still a perception. I think they just feel a little bit rounder and a little bit more mature in a nice way, across the board. No, some of them are more so than others, but so far on the ones we've had so far, it's just a note that we've been making on a couple, throughout the tasting.
Richard Smart briefly mentioned peace. This is press early, accentuated cut edges. So if you're trying to move a wine to market and maybe turn the tanks because you just don't have any, then that's an option. You can make wines that are quite fruity and well extracted in 3 days. The next one is made by Carl at Allegro, and this is a Long Island Cabernet Sauvignon. I really want to emphasize that I think everybody that participated in the study was a real champion. And to be able to do something like this with you guys is a great privilege, and I think everybody did a great job. On to Lemberger. Phil, do you want to say anything about this before we go?
This Lemberger is a farm up on Lake Ontario that's usually 10 to 14 days behind on ripening. We see a little less phenolic concentration there, which is part of the reason why I thought this would be an interesting variety to play with the DTMA. And Lemberger have a bunch of different personalities. So you can see it sometimes where it comes off really light, almost akin to a Pinot Noir, and sometimes you can see it come off really dark and extracted, similar to a Syrah. I think this one leans a bit more in the Pinot Noir direction. I mean, obviously, I prefer the treatment. I feel like there's more roundness there. Feels like there's more weight in that treated sample. There's a bit more color. One of the things that I'm seeing consistently with these is that it has a way of making the fruit push a little darker. Like the control samples are a lot more red fruit heavy than the treated samples.
Retronasally, and as you say, in the mouth, it's actually quite tasty. And then the other thing that it has that the control does not have is there's all these violets in the finish.
Yeah, that's one thing I noticed too. We had Bob Medill here, and he was commenting on how floral they were. I think there's a lot of red raspberry on the untreated, but it definitely pushes more into that blueberry territory for me once you get it through the treatment.
Why don't you talk a little bit about what you observed in that Riesling?
Oh, so we had a small lot of Riesling that we were running the same day we were running this trial. And we decided to put it through the DTMA and go direct to press. And boy, if it isn't the most floral Riesling we've worked with. It was so flowery, almost muscat type characters, even at the juice phase. Far less of that like straw character that you sometimes see in Riesling juice, and really just flowery right out of the gate. It's something that we're really looking forward to. We still haven't bottled it yet.
Yeah, I can't wait to taste it.
Hey, Clark.
Yes.
Clark, can I ask you a question? This is Connor.
Sure.
In terms of, potential reduction in herbaceous characteristics, did you do any thiol analysis to see if there was, any transformation in thiols from like methane thiol to dimethyl sulfides, where you might see a reduction instead of an actual transformation of any pyrazines in the wines?
We did not.
Okay.
But I think in general, you're going to see that the treated wines will tend towards the production of H2S in the short term. But, and I used to think of that as a defect, but now I worry about wines that don't do it when they're young. Randall Graham used to say that H2S is like acne. It's related to testosterone. And if your 14-year-old son doesn't have pimples, he's not going to be happily married when he's 65. So yeah, I think they will move in that direction, but we did not do any ETS. You're looking at all the numbers we got.
Okay, thank you, Tim.
Yeah, and so with that, for me, I'm seeing that for the most part, I'm actually preferring, from a sensory standpoint, as the preferred wine, that I like the controls better at the moment. But knowing what I think the progression through with the reductiveness and, the rounding out of, so to me, I think a lot of the treatments are a little bit more grainy, with, higher concentration of tannins. But I think that would bode well for the future and the longevity of the wines, judging these today. So my thought is that I actually like the controls better, but that the treatments will eventually be better. I don't know if anybody else is seeing that or feeling the same way.
I'm holding mine. I didn't send anybody my samples, which I apologize for, kind of. Only because I'm holding them in neutral French oak barrels completely. So everything was completely identical. So we can do this tasting in 9 months to 10 months or a year, whatever, to see how they have lasted with longevity and how where they go from there.
What are you seeing so far?
Right now, like with this tasting, a lot of it is the aromatics are more enhanced. The color, I was really impressed with the first two samples with the Hawkhaven. There was a very strong color difference. For us, we just, it's there, but it's almost negligible. You can say, yeah, there's a little bit. Hopefully we'll see more in a year.
Are you seeing these textural differences that we're talking about?
Yes, absolutely.
The Lemberger is interesting because that's kind of a subjective choice if you like red fruits or dark fruits more. I completely agree. So my name's Han. I'm from Bear Creek over in Lodi, California. We did a Pinot Noir treatment. And unfortunately, our treated sample got blended away before we could pull samples. Otherwise, we'd have it today. And we noticed the same thing where the treated sample had much more dark fruit, had a darker color, a lot of tannins as well, which, depends on the variety you're working with. Could be good, could be bad. For Pinot Noir, it's not quite as desirable, but I mean, if you use it on a Cab Sauv, I think it's great.
Yeah, thanks for talking about that Pinot, Han. It was actually in the phenolic chemistry, we were able to run it, and it was one of the most improved players. So I stuck it into the PCA that I'll show it when we've looked at all the wines. But it was really quite remarkable. Okay, so now we have the rarest of beasts, Finger Lakes Cabernet Sauvignon, and well, it hell has color. Okay, Phil. Well, I think you're punching above your weight for Finger Lakes Cabernet. I would have bet big money that this was a Washington State Cab.
Well, thanks, Clark. We try real hard. So
it's got all this color and weight, and it wouldn't be a California wine because of the acidity. But very, very similar to the Horsehaven, Columbia Valley stuff.
Yeah, I think we just had a combination of factors here. We had a really like maybe like a once in a decade vintage. It was warm and dry all summer, and everything in the Finger Lakes was really, really concentrated. We didn't struggle to get to ripeness. And this came from a farm on the west side of Cayuga Lake that tends to hold on to its acid really well too. So we have that playing into things. But I noticed here, one of the things that's most interesting to me is that I get the classic like green jalapeno thing in the untreated, that herbaceousness, and it changes in the treated. There's a lot of non-fruit stuff there, but it's leaning more in like that licorice, cocoa powder kind of direction where it's kind of herbal, but it's not herbaceous at the same time.
Yeah, this is, half my book is about aromatic integration, and this is a really good example of it. Nothing to add. Okay, let's move on. Yeah, kind of more of the same. Yeah, it's really all the same trends that we've talked about before. Okay, so now we move to California.
Lorenzo might know a little bit about the mechanics of the treatment.
Hi, everyone. Yeah, we treated the cab, and we have faced some issues in pairing the speed of the DTMA, and we can't say we have treated at 50%, because comparing the different flow rates we were having during the test and the trial, we were giggling continuously and tilting between over the maximum and way over the minimum. So we've tried to take a medium of this flow rate and talking with Oren and comparing what was the resulting as from his side, we assume we could say we treated at 50% of the total capacity of the equipment.
We're seeing really no differences at all in the HPLC analysis, extremely consistent. And in the wine X-ray, just a little bit of a bump in all factors. A little bit of a decrease in the total anthocyanin, the anthocyanin side, although the bound anthocyanin, which is kind of the good kind, we did get about a 20% increase. Comments?
Anybody think the control seemed floral?
Yes.
I agree.
That which is strange, was strange for me out of a Cabernet. And then the treatment to me seemed to have less of that floral character. I mean, there's always this. Actually, you know, when I think about it, you know what? That might be rose taint.
I was wondering about that.
You know what? If you haven't smelled that before, in fact, I bet you anything that's what it is what happens is late in the season, you'll get a frost and the leaves will desiccate. And if you go through with a mechanical harvester, you won't be able to get those leaves. They'll just come right through with you know what? That's what it is. It's slightly florally tainted.
Do you know
not bad, believe me. You can have 3 or 4 times that intensity in some cases. But so there's less of that character in the treatment, but I also think much rougher tannins, much more robust, rustic kind of wine. And
which might not be appropriate to their program.
Yeah, and well, actually, I'm not even sure that it would be appropriate for almost anybody's program. Seems bitter to me, a little bit higher in bitterness, and like I say, a little bit more stringent for sure.
Well, I did this. I get some Pinot from Clarksburg, and for some reason, it comes off. I mean, I made a lot of Pinot from different places all over the world. And this is the most feminine Pinot I've ever come across. It actually, our 2019 just got released and every drop of it is gone. And I did it on the 2020 and I regret it. And I'll never do it again because of the same thing. It turned it into like a regular Pinot. And that's the last thing I wanted to do. So now I'm gonna have to age that wine for several years. And oh well. So yeah, this isn't for everything, that's for sure. Kind of reminds me of when we were at Delicato and we were doing Petite Syrah micro-ox, and we were turning it into this magnificent wine that they couldn't sell because they were a bulk wine. They wanted to sell a Petite Syrahs in this December, and they were awful. They were reduced and you know, big wines. They were great wines, but you know, you don't really need 500,000 gallons of a really beautiful Petite Syrah that you can't sell for 3 years. Finally, we'll do the Allegro, and I think this is the most interesting wine in the bunch. The reason I'm saying that is that this stuff was picked, mechanically harvested in Washington, Columbia Valley, and shipped in spacecraft, you know, giant bag in the box, 1 ton. It came in quite sloshy. But all I'm saying is this was a 6-day cold soak when we got it. And still there's huge differences in what the DTMA did. I think you'll find it fascinating. So Genevieve, this kind of calls bullshit on what I was saying about Merlot getting extracted completely very early. Not this one.
No, although it is interesting to hear that you can really harvest in Washington and then make the wine on the other side of the country? Because I have clients who keep asking me if they can do that.
They can do that. And I think he was paying $1,600 a ton delivered to Pennsylvania. He can't pick the fruit in his own backyard
No.
for that kind of money.
It was 1,600 a ton, but there was delivery on top of that.
Oh, is that right? How much is the delivery?
It came out to, I think, around 400 a ton delivered,
So,
1,000 a ton.
That's okay.
Carl, you bought the thing.
I did. I probably feel like a little bit of a need to defend my purchase here, but I think this last wine at least shows some kind of justification for it. I mean, I think when it works well, and of course, this is just the first year, and this was, I think, maybe the first load through it was this wine, but when you get your timing right and whatever else right, there seems to be a vibrancy to it, I don't know. There's something that happens where we get an intensity and a sap to the wine, which we don't get otherwise. And I really like it. It happened, I think, on this wine. It happened on maybe 2 other lots, but not across the board. So there's some lots we did where we didn't get the same kind of bump. And whether it's variety related, location related, I'm sure there's partly, how we use the machine, and whether or not we had the right speed going through there's probably a lot of trying to get this right. But I mean, after tasting a couple of the varieties, specifically this one, also the Petite Syrah we ran through here, it was just a night and day kind of thing, which is what convinced me to make sure it didn't leave the East Coast.
Well, I think this is a little different than the previous wine in that, at least to my perception, both wines have a boatload of tannin, but this has some fat in the treated wine that makes the tannins a lot more agreeable.
Yeah, and that's really, I think, what we saw with a few of the treated wines. So I think we ran probably 7, maybe 8 lots through this machine.
Yeah.
2 or 3 of the lots where there's almost like a sweetness to it already, even at this young age, and that little fatness to it. And it wasn't across the board, but on a few of the lots we experienced that. So I think it's kind of at this point trying to fine tune how to achieve that same effect across the board with these other wines, or maybe it doesn't happen either. And as you know, we do a lot of sacrificial tannins, upwards of between 250 to sometimes 400 grams per ton. We'll maybe even 600 grams per ton. We'll add anywhere between 2 to maybe 5 grams per liter of tartaric to wine. So I'm a kitchen sink winemaker. We have no holds barred, and this is part of that whole program for us. It's like, no stone unturned kind of thing. And I think this might be kind of the key that unlocks maybe the Venn diagram of our acid use, our tannin use, and our macerations that we do. So, so I'm thrilled. So yeah, I'm glad it's here for this next harvest.
I'm going to show you guys the PCA of the phenolic data. I'm not going to include the HPLC stuff, but I'll send it all out to you all. But I think we've already gone over what those data have to say. And thank you guys in Iowa so much for taking care of that for us. First of all, what you've got here is the coordinates of a point in 5-dimensional space for the 18 wines. And what a PCA does is it puts the best fit plane through that 5-dimensional space and projects everything onto it. Now, that's not going to work unless they're highly correlated, but it turns out that when you do this in wine, you almost always capture at least 80% of the data, even in a data set of 10 or 12 dimensions. And this is no exception. In the first axis, we got 68.2%. And in the second axis, 25.4%. So we have 94.6% of what that data had to say in 2 dimensions. Isn't that great? So then the points are projected, and so are the axes. If 2 axes are correlated, they'll project in the same direction. If they're negatively correlated, they'll go in opposite directions. So for example, in the PCA that we got this morning from Iowa, the lactic and the malic are in opposite directions because they're negatively correlated. And then if there are right angles, then there is no correlation. These are the 5 axes. And basically you have the 2 tannin measures being highly, highly correlated. they're headed off to the bottom right. Then almost at right angles, we have the anthocyanin numbers. And then in between, unsurprisingly, we have the bound anthocyanins, which are related to both. So those are the axes on which we project all of the samples, and I've given them different colors to make them easier to see, but I'll just point them out as we taste it. So and what we're basically saying is, if bound anthocyanin is that oiliness that we're talking about, then movement from left to right is what we're after. In the case of the Merlot, I think much more sensory differences in that wine than show up in the wine X-ray. So not a lot of difference. The little bit of difference there is in the right direction, but with a Jersey Cab, we see a big difference, a lot more tannin and a lot more color. For the Long Island Cab Franc, we're mostly moving in the direction of more tannin and maybe even a little less in the anthocyanin. Same story for the Long Island Merlot. It's in a different place, but the direction of movement is the same. On the other hand, for the Long Island Cab that Carl made, gave us substantial increase in all the factors. And over here, poor old Limburger over here, there's like nothing happening. So I'm so glad that we're compiling sensory data that we'll put in along with this, and we'll be able to look at a different dimension. But at least for what we got out of wine X-ray, that was a non-event. Up here's the Finger Lakes Cab. Pretty good increase in both color and for the Santa Barbara Cab, we moved in a direction of less color and more tannin. Here's that Bear Creek Pinot. Look at that. More tannin, but more color too. That's it. So here are the average sensory ratings from 0 to 10 for 17 judges on color intensity, brown hue, red fruit, dark fruit, vegetal, aroma openness, body, texture, fruit in the finish, and paired preference. This is a pretty big table. This is how those 10 parameters show up in the best fit plane in that 10-dimensional space. So you can see that aroma openness is negatively correlated with brown hue. Paired preference goes exactly to the right, and it's paired with dark fruit, fruit in the finish, finish length, and texture. So basically over to the right is good, over to the left is not so good. We have vegetal, brown hue, that sort of thing, and a closed aroma. Then I have all of the 18 trials here color-coded together, and to make them a little easier to see, I've linked them together. To begin with, in this plane, we got 10 dimensions. We managed to capture almost 54% of the variability in the data in a single dimension, and then we get another 15.4 in the second dimension. So all together, in just 2 dimensions, we've got a plot that has 69% of the variability in the data in this plane, which is pretty great. So here is the New Jersey Merlot, which has a huge swing from the left to the right. So more finish length. Everybody in the trial preferred it over the control. Fruit in the finish, aromatic openness, and texture. Here's the New Jersey Cabernet, which is moving in a slightly different direction, but still pretty much to the right. Here's the Long Island Cab Franc. This is the Long Island Merlot, and the reason it's doing that is that it's very strong in this red fruit component that was really the most improved player of all of them. Here's the Long Island Cabernet Sauvignon that Carl made. Here's the Finger Lakes Limburger, where we got a much better texture. This didn't really show up in the phenolic chemistry, but it definitely shows up in the sensory. Here is the Finger Lakes Cabernet Sauvignon, quite an improvement. And here is the Santa Barbara Cabernet Sauvignon. Way up there is the Columbia Valley Merlot. So you can see that overall, all of the trials moved in the direction from left to right. All a little bit different, but that is the trend. I should also point out that in every case, the average paired preference was higher for the treated wine than it was for the control. Well, then I guess we're gonna wrap this up.
Just thanks to everybody who participated in the trial. You can, if you're interested in pursuing this further, you can contact either the main Della Toffola number or Clark. We do have equipment available for sale for this vintage. We'd have to mate it up to your voltage, so and size. So we have a limited number of machines available. So, but thanks to Clark and thanks to everybody who participated in the trial.
Yeah, it was really thrilling to work with all of you. Thank you so very much.
Thank you for putting this together. It's great.
Yes,
You
thank
betcha.
you.